Cruising at 35,000 feet, a routine charter flight becomes a death trap when both pilots collapse. Panic grips the cabin, but one quiet passenger holds a 12-year secret. When fighter jets move in to shoot them down, an unexpected radio transmission changes everything. Viper is back in the sky. Clarissa Robinson appeared to be nothing more than a high school physics teacher en route to a boring educational symposium. Seated in 12A of a chartered Boeing 737-800, she adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, flipped a page of her paperback novel, and methodically ignored the faint, high-pitched whine of the twin turbofan engines. To the 50-odd passengers aboard Flight 408, mostly fellow educators and district administrators, she was simply Ms. Robinson, the quiet woman who brought excellent snickerdoodles to faculty meetings and possessed a bizarrely encyclopedic knowledge of aerodynamics. Nobody on that aircraft knew that 12 years ago she did not grade papers. 12 years ago, Clarissa wore a G-suit. She strapped herself into the cockpit of an F-15E Strike Eagle and tore through hostile skies at Mach 2.5. She had been one of the very few female fighter aces in modern military history, racking up 5 confirmed air-to-air kills and dozens of successful high-risk ground strikes under the call sign Viper. She had been a legend. And then, abruptly, she was gone. A highly classified mission over hostile territory had gone spectacularly wrong. Her wingman perished, the operation was buried in black ink, and Clarissa quietly surrendered her wings, locking her past inside a mental vault that she swore never to open again. She wanted normalcy. She wanted quiet. For over a decade, she successfully maintained the illusion. She never looked up when military jets roared overhead. She never renewed her civilian pilot's license. She simply faded into the mundane rhythm of civilian life. But aviation, much like a dormant instinct, never truly leaves a pilot's blood. Flight 408 was halfway between Seattle and Anchorage, cutting through a thick layer of stratocumulus clouds over the Pacific Ocean, when the illusion of safety fractured. Up in the cockpit, Captain David Lawson, a 30-year veteran of commercial aviation, was casually adjusting the autopilot heading while sipping lukewarm coffee. His co-pilot, First Officer Brian Halloway, had been fighting a severe stomach bug since they left the tarmac. 5 minutes earlier, Brian had unbuckled his harness, muttering apologies, and retreated to the forward lavatory. He never came back. Clarissa felt the subtle shift in the cabin pressure first. It was a minuscule change, something an ordinary passenger would write off as a popped ear, but Clarissa's internal altimeter was finely tuned. She looked up from her book. The flight attendants at the front of the cabin were gathered near the lavatory door, their faces tight with concern. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, was knocking frantically. Then the aircraft jerked. It was not the bumpy, rhythmic jostle of standard clear-air turbulence. It was a sharp, uncoordinated yaw to the left, followed by a sickening drop in the nose. The heavy Boeing 737 shuddered as the autopilot violently disengaged with an audible warning chime that echoed through the cabin bulkhead. Clarissa's heart slammed against her ribs. Muscle memory, dormant for 4,380 days, instantly awoke. She knew that feeling. The aircraft was entering a slip. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." A flight attendant's voice crackled over the PA system, trembling uncontrollably. Before the announcement even finished, the plane pitched downward. The cabin erupted into terrified screams as loose cups, laptops, and magazines went weightless, floating briefly before crashing against the ceiling. The steepness of the dive pinned passengers into their seats. Clarissa did not scream. Her eyes narrowed, instantly calculating the pitch angle. 15 degrees nose down, bank angle 30 degrees left. Increasing. She unbuckled her seatbelt, fighting the negative G-forces that threatened to lift her into the overhead bins. The man next to her grabbed her arm, his face pale with terror. "What are you doing? Sit down!" "Let go of me," Clarissa commanded, her voice dropping the soft, teacher-like cadence and adopting a sharp, authoritative edge that cut through the panic. She pulled herself up the tilted aisle, moving hand over hand along the seatbacks. The flight attendants were clinging to the forward galley counters, crying as the aircraft continued its terrifying plunge toward the freezing waters of the Pacific. "Open that door!" Clarissa shouted over the roar of the rushing wind outside the fuselage, pointing at the reinforced cockpit door. "We can't. It's locked," Sarah sobbed, struggling to stay on her feet. "First Officer Halloway is unconscious in the bathroom, and Captain Lawson isn't answering the intercom." Clarissa didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy fire axe mounted behind a glass panel in the galley. With one precise, brutal swing, she shattered the glass, retrieved the tool, and turned to the emergency access keypad next to the cockpit door. She knew the standard override codes for Boeing commercial flights, a piece of knowledge she had retained from her obsessive reading of aviation manuals during her civilian years. She punched in the emergency sequence. A red light blinked green. The heavy door clicked unlocked. Clarissa shoved it open and threw herself into the cockpit. The scene was a nightmare of blaring alarms and flashing lights. The master caution panel was glowing fiercely red. A mechanical voice rhythmically chanted, bank angle, pull up, terrain." Captain David Lawson was slumped completely forward over the control yoke, his hands locked in a death grip. His face was ashen, his lips tinted blue. A massive cardiac arrest had paralyzed him, and the dead weight of his body was forcing the control column forward and to the left, driving the airliner into a graveyard spiral. "Help me get him off the stick," Clarissa yelled at Sarah, who had bravely crawled into the cockpit behind her. Together, fighting the tremendous gravitational pull of the diving aircraft, they hauled the unconscious captain backward, unlatching his harness and letting him slide to the floor of the confined space. Clarissa did not pause to check his pulse. She threw herself into the left seat, the captain's seat, her hands wrapped around the yoke. For a microsecond, 12 years of buried trauma flashed behind her eyes. The last time she held controls this tightly, her wingman's jet was erupting into a fireball over the desert. The ghosts of the past screamed at her, begging her to freeze. Instead, Viper took over. The altimeter was unwinding at a terrifying speed. They had plummeted from 35,000 feet to 14,000 in less than 2 minutes. The airspeed indicator was creeping dangerously close to the red line, the maximum structural limit of the aircraft. If they went any faster, the wings would rip completely off the fuselage. "Pull up! Terrain! Pull up!" The ground proximity warning system screamed mercilessly. "Hold on to something," Clarissa ordered through gritted teeth. She planted her feet on the rudder pedals and pulled back on the yoke. She didn't yank it. Doing so at this speed would overstress the airframe and cause a catastrophic structural failure. Instead, she applied firm, steady, agonizingly calculated pressure. She fed in right rudder to counteract the steep left bank, balancing the heavy commercial jet as if she were wrestling a sluggish, overweight bomber. The G-forces spiked, pressing her violently into the seat. Behind her, the cabin groaned, the metal composite of the Boeing 737 protesting under the extreme aerodynamic load. Slowly, agonizingly, the nose began to lift. The altimeter blurred as the descent rate slowed. 10,000 feet, 8,000, 6,000. At 4,000 feet above the dark, churning waves of the Pacific. The aircraft finally leveled out. Clarissa exhaled a ragged breath, her hands shaking slightly against the leather of the yoke. She quickly adjusted the throttles, stabilizing their airspeed, and engaged the auto throttle to maintain a safe cruising speed. She glanced at the navigational display, and her stomach dropped. During the uncontrolled descent, the aircraft had drifted violently off its filed flight plan. The erratic high-speed dive had scrambled their heading. They were no longer safely over international waters, heading toward Alaska. They had veered sharply east, cutting straight toward a heavily restricted swath of military airspace off the coast of Washington state, an exclusion zone used for highly classified naval deployments. Clarissa reached for the radio console, her fingers flying over the dials to tune into guard frequency, 121.5 megahertz, the International Emergency Channel. Before she could press the push-to-talk switch, the radio crackled to life, filling the cockpit with a harsh, authoritative voice. Unidentified aircraft squawking 7700. This is the United States Air Force. You have entered restricted airspace. Divert your course immediately to heading 290. Acknowledge immediately, or you will be intercepted and subject to lethal force. Clarissa's eyes darted to the window, bursting through the cloud deck on her left. Moving with predatory grace was a grey silhouette she recognized instantly. The diamond-shaped wings, the twin-canted tail fins, the distinct stealth profile. It was an F-22 Raptor. A second one appeared on her right, effectively boxing the crippled airliner in. Through the thick cockpit glass, Clarissa could see the pilot in the left Raptor. He was close, terrifyingly close. He was flying off her wingtip, his helmeted head turned directly toward her. Underneath the Raptor's wing, the bay doors were open, exposing an AIM-9X Sidewinder missile. They were not bluffing. They were locked on and ready to fire. "Sarah," Clarissa said calmly, not taking her eyes off the fighter jet. "Check on the captain. He's breathing, but barely," the flight attendant stammered from the floor. "Ms. Robinson, what are those? Are they going to shoot us down?" "Not if I can help it," Clarissa muttered. She pressed the radio switch on the yoke. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is civilian charter flight 408. Be advised, both the captain and first officer are medically incapacitated. I have assumed manual control of the aircraft. I am experiencing navigational system errors following a severe altitude drop. Attempting to comply with heading 290. There was a pause on the radio. The military controllers were likely scrambling to process the fact that a calm, authoritative female voice was currently piloting a Boeing 737 that was supposed to be plunging into the ocean. "Flight 408, this is Raptor Lead," the voice of the F-22 pilot echoed over the frequency. It sounded young, highly disciplined, but edged with deep suspicion. "Identify yourself. Are you a certified commercial pilot?" Clarissa adjusted the trim wheel, keeping the heavy aircraft flying level. She looked out the window directly at the F-22 on her wing. The insignia on the tail flashed in the sunlight. The 91st Fighter Squadron. The Diceman. "Raptor Lead, this is Clarissa Robinson. I am a passenger. I do not hold a current commercial aviation license." Another heavy silence on the radio. "Flight 408, Raptor Lead responded, his tone hardening significantly. "We are running your name through the FAA database. We have no record of a Clarissa Robinson holding any flight certifications. You are commanding a heavy aircraft in a restricted, high-security zone. If this is a hostile takeover, you have exactly 10 seconds to turn this aircraft around before I put a missile through your left engine." The Raptor drifted closer, perfectly matching her speed, an unspoken threat hanging in the freezing air between them. They thought she was a hijacker, a terrorist who had disabled the crew and taken the yoke to crash the plane into a military asset, Clarissa felt a cold, familiar calm wash over her. The panic of the civilian world faded completely, replaced by the icy, calculated precision of the fighter pilot she used to be. 12 years of hiding were about to end, but if blowing her cover was the only way to save the 50 souls sleeping in the cabin behind her, she would burn her quiet life to the ground. "Raptor lead," Clarissa said, her voice dropping an octave, slipping effortlessly into the clipped tactical cadence of military comms. "You can check the FAA database all you want, but you're looking in the wrong system. Connect me to NORAD command immediately." "Negative, Flight 408. You will comply with my—" "I said patch me through, Lieutenant," Clarissa barked, the absolute authority in her voice making the young pilot physically flinch in his cockpit. "You tell NORAD command that authentication code Tango Bravo 907 is currently flying this heavy. You tell them that Viper has the stick, and you tell them to get me a goddamn vector to the nearest medical runway before my captain dies on this deck." The radio went dead. The static hissed softly. Outside, the F-22 maintained its rigid formation, but Clarissa could see the pilot's helmet tilt slightly as he frantically communicated with his command center on a secure frequency. 30 seconds passed. It felt like 30 years. Clarissa kept her hands steady, maintaining a flawless, straight and level flight path, despite the immense drag of the heavier aircraft. Finally, the radio clicked back on. When the voice returned, it wasn't the young, aggressive F-22 pilot. It was an older, deeper voice, transmitting directly from the underground bunkers of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. "Flight 408, this is NORAD Actual. We are verifying authentication code. Stand by." Clarissa listened to the faint hum of the Boeing's avionics. "Authentication confirmed," the NORAD commander's voice crackled, laced with an unmistakable shock that bled through the strict military professionalism. "Holy hell, it really is you. Viper, this is Major Tilden Reynolds. We thought you were completely off the grid." Clarissa smiled, a tight, grim expression that did not reach her eyes. She remembered Tilden Reynolds. 12 years ago, he had been a greenhorn rookie wingman she had to chew out for flying too loose in a diamond formation over Baghdad. Now he was sitting in the big chair at NORAD. "Good to hear your voice, Tommy," Clarissa replied coolly. "I've been teaching high school physics. Now, are you going to let your boys shoot me down, or are you going to give me a runway?" Major Reynolds exhaled a long, heavy breath over the encrypted military frequency. "Copy that, Viper. Hearing your voice on that stick is the best news I have had all decade. We are immediately routing you to McCord Field, Vector 095. Descend to 10,000 feet when you are ready. Emergency medical and fire response teams are already spinning up on the tarmac." Clarissa swiftly adjusted the heading bug on the autopilot panel, though she kept her hands firmly gripping the yoke. "Copy your last, McCord. Vector 095, descending to 10,000 feet. Raptor lead broke his strict radio silence, his voice entirely stripped of its previous hostile suspicion. "Flight 408, this is Raptor lead. Captain James Miller. Ma'am, it is an absolute honor to fly on your wing. We will escort you safely down." "Save the flattery, Captain Miller," Clarissa replied, her eyes rigidly scanning the primary flight display. "Compliments will not keep this damaged bird in the air. Tuck in close to my underbelly. I need a visual inspection of the fuselage. That sudden dive pulled a significant amount of G-force, and this commercial airframe is groaning like an overstressed suspension bridge." Miller brought his F-22 Raptor gracefully beneath the Boeing's fuselage, his wingman holding a protective, high-cover position above the clouds. Minutes ticked by in agonizing suspense as the heavy jet cut through the dense grey cloud deck, descending toward the rugged, rain-slicked coastline of Washington state. Inside the chaotic cockpit, Sarah was rhythmically compressing Captain Lawson's chest, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. "He is fading, Ms. Robinson," she gasped between compressions. "His pulse is incredibly weak." "Keep pushing, Sarah," Clarissa commanded, her tone brooking absolutely no argument or hesitation. "Do not stop until our wheels are firmly on the tarmac and the paramedics take over." Suddenly, a sharp, blaring warning horn pierced the ambient noise of the cockpit. A yellow master caution light illuminated brilliantly on the overhead panel. Hydraulics. "Flight 408, Miller's voice crackled through the headset, laced with sudden, sharp urgency. "You have a severe fluid leak originating directly from the right main landing gear bay. It looks like the hydraulic lines ruptured catastrophically during your over-G recovery maneuver. Please acknowledge." Clarissa ground her teeth together, toggling the radio switch. "Copy, Raptor Lead. I am currently seeing System B hydraulic pressure dropping rapidly to 0. She reached up and flipped the alternate extension switch for the landing gear, praying silently that the backup electrical systems would hold under the strain. A loud, violent mechanical clunk reverberated through the entire cabin floor, followed by the deafening sound of rushing wind as the heavy gear doors forced themselves open. 2 bright green lights illuminated on the center console. The third light, the indicator for the right main gear, stayed stubbornly, terrifyingly dark. "Miller, talk to me," Clarissa demanded, her knuckles turning bone white on the control yoke. "Did the right gear deploy at all?" Banking sharply, the F-22 maneuvered for a better visual angle beneath the Boeing. "Negative, Viper. Your right main gear is jammed halfway out of the bay. It is severely hung up on a fractured hydraulic strut. If you try to put her down like that, the gear assembly will collapse immediately upon impact, and your right wing will strike the concrete at high speed." Major Reynolds immediately interjected from the NORAD command bunker. "Viper, this is actual. McCord Base Command is clearing a 10,000-foot runway and heavily foaming the deck right now. Can you try to shake the gear loose? Attempt a negative G pitch or a hard yaw maneuver to force it down." "Negative, Tommy," Clarissa replied, her brilliant mind rapidly calculating the unforgiving physics of the crippled airliner. "If I yank this heavy bird around too aggressively, the asymmetrical drag will throw us straight into a flat spin. We simply do not have the necessary altitude to recover from a spin in a commercial jet. I have to land it exactly as it is." "Clarissa," Reynolds pleaded, his voice dropping the strict military protocol, speaking directly to her as the mentor she once was. "You are talking about balancing a 160-ton commercial aircraft on one single leg at 140 knots. If that right wing drops too soon, the fuel tanks will rupture and the foam will not save you." "Then I guess I better not let the wing drop," she stated with absolute chilling flatness. Keying the public address system, she projected a calm, authoritative voice to the terrified passengers in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Clarissa again. We are currently on final approach to McCord Field. We have a slight mechanical issue with our landing gear deployment. I need everyone to immediately assume the brace position. Heads down, hands tightly over your heads. Flight attendants, prepare for an emergency evacuation the moment we come to a complete stop." Switching back to the tactical military frequency, she didn't wait for any further instructions. "Raptor Lead, give me some operating space. I need to feel exactly how this aircraft handles dirty before I put her on the ground." Miller's stealth fighter peeled away instantly, giving her a remarkably wide berth. Clarissa deployed the remaining functional flaps, immediately fighting the enormous amount of asymmetrical drag that desperately wanted to pull the aircraft violently to the right. Her left leg extended fully, pressing relentlessly on the rudder pedal to keep the nose pointed straight ahead. Piloting the jet felt exactly like trying to steer a massive semi-truck on black ice with a blown front tire. Heavy rain began to lash fiercely against the reinforced windshield as they descended steadily through 3,000 feet. The sprawling, highly secured military base of McCord Field finally emerged from the dense grey mist. The long, seemingly endless strip of concrete was lined with dozens of flashing red and blue emergency lights. Massive fire trucks and armoured ambulances were already rolling rapidly down the parallel taxiways, pacing the runway in grim anticipation of a fiery catastrophe. 2,000 feet, Clarissa muttered softly to herself, her eyes flicking rapidly between the airspeed indicator, the digital altimeter, and the distant runway threshold. She was fundamentally a fighter pilot. She was entirely accustomed to nimble, overpowered tactical jets that responded instantly to the slightest twitch of a pilot's muscle. Currently, she was wrestling a wounded, unresponsive behemoth, forced to anticipate the aircraft's sluggish reactions several seconds in advance just to keep it airborne. "Viper, you are slightly high on the glide slope," Reynolds cautioned over the secure radio link. "I know, Tommy. I am intentionally keeping my airspeed up. If I slow down too much on the approach, I will lose all rudder authority, and this crosswind will blow me right off the center line before I even touch the pavement." "Copy that. Godspeed, Viper." 500 feet. The wet ground rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed.